In the vaulted, silent heart of the galaxy, in the eternal midnight of the Centauri Prime archives, the past does not die. It merely sleeps, buried in crystal and cold data, waiting for the right hand to brush off the dust of eons. Archivist Kellen moved through this ossified memory palace, her 6 arms a blur of precise motion. Her people, the Althari, were the galaxy's memory keepers, curators of stories so old their tellers had turned to cosmic dust. The air here smelled of ozone and forgotten time. She moved past the records of forgotten dynasties and the chronicles of supernovae that had erased whole civilizations, her task to sort, to categorize, to maintain the silence of dead things. Her delicate fingers paused over a data crystal frosted with neglect. Its markings were archaic, its timestamp bleeding back over 3 millennia. A simple, chilling label, Sol System, Extinct Species Report. Curiosity, the silent engine of her order, compelled her. She touched the crystal. A hologram flickered to life, a ghost in the dark. The report was terse, hurried, etched with the clinical detachment of explorers who had looked into an abyss and quickly stepped back. She read aloud, her voice the only sound in a mile of stillness. Species designation, human. Planet of origin, 3rd planet Sol star. Status, extinct. Cause, self-inflicted warfare. Notable characteristics, highly aggressive, extremely adaptable, unusually creative problem solvers, capable of surviving in environments lethal to most known life forms. The words hung in the air. It went on, a catalog of nightmare biology. Wars lasting generations, a world where the very weather hunted, where plants conspired in poison, where animals were born with fangs and claws aimed at the planet's dominant, fragile apes. It was the final note that made the fine fur on her neck rise. Recommend complete avoidance of Sol System. If humans somehow survived their wars, they would pose a significant, unprecedented threat to galactic stability. Their combination of intelligence, aggression, and adaptability is without parallel. Kellen saved the file and moved on. A ghost story. The galaxy's attic was full of them. Like, subscribe, share, and comment to join us in the heart of the greatest legend the galaxy ever forgot. 3 sectors away. In the cold, arrogant light of conquest, Admiral Zakar of the Hegemony stood on the command bridge of the Dominator. Before him, through armored viewports, the world of Riel 7 burned. Its cities were orange wounds against the dark side of the planet. Another victory, another demonstration. The Hegemony had seceded from the soft, chattering Federation half a century prior, trading weak words for strong blades. In 50 years, they had swallowed 67 star systems, grinding a dozen species under their armored boots. Strength was the only universal law, and the Hegemony was its brutal prophet. Admiral, Science Officer Vex approached, his tentacles writhing with subdued excitement. Analysis of the captured Federation archives is complete, mostly cultural dross, but one file, an anomaly. Zakar did not turn from the burning world. A threat. Vex emitted a sound like grating stone, amusement. Hardly. A report on an extinct species.
Humans.
From the Sol System, they apparently wiped themselves out with primitive fission weapons over 3,000 years ago. The explorers who filed it, they seemed genuinely frightened. Now Zakar turned, his scaled face a mask of reptilian curiosity. Frightened? Of primitives with chemical explosives. The description is visceral, Admiral. Vex quoted, his tone mocking. Humans appear capable of fighting even when clinically dead. Observed instances of continuing combat with injuries that would liquefy nervous systems in known species. Recommend extreme caution. A ripple of cold laughter moved through the bridge crew. The idea was absurd. A fairy tale to scare children. Weapons tech? Zakar asked. Projectile launchers. Rudimentary fission devices. They had barely achieved faster-than-light travel before turning their cities to glass. Zakhar's tongue flicked out, tasting the sterile air. They destroyed their own cities? Their own world. With relish, it seems. A flicker of something, not respect but recognition, passed through the Admiral's cold eyes. Such utter, self-immolating ruthlessness was a dark mirror to his own philosophy. A species that would do that to itself would have no qualms doing worse to others. Fascinating, he murmured, but irrelevant. Dead things do not threaten the living. Focus on the next Federation system. The file was forgotten, buried under more pressing data of conquest. What did the ghost of a dead ape matter to the masters of the galaxy? Meanwhile, in the deep, unexplored silence between the spiral arms, a new star was moving. Aboard the UES Defiance, Captain Sarah Chun watched the starfield bleed into streaks of impossible light. Her ship, a 5-kilometer spear of alloy and resolve, carved through hyperspace, a bubble of borrowed physics containing a world of focused intent. She stood on the observation deck, a statue of calm, but her mind was a tactical grid, constantly calculating. She appeared young, her dark hair cut short and practical, her eyes holding a weight that belied her years, a common trait among humans who had grown up in the long, silent aftermath. The Defiance was officially an exploration vessel. To human eyes, there was no distinction between a ship that sought new life and a ship that could defend it. Their history had burned that lesson into their DNA. Captain. Commander Jackson's voice was a low vibration in the quiet. Long-range sensors were picking up structured radio signals. Artificial. Multiple sources. The patterns are alien. 2 words that changed 3 centuries of lonely expansion. Artificial. Alien. That on the bridge, a controlled frenzy took hold. Sarah settled into her command chair, the neural interface linking her to the ship's soul. The main screen filled with waveforms, complex, beautiful, and utterly, profoundly other. The mathematics were wrong, the harmonics dissonant to human expectation. It was the sound of a mind that did not think in human terms. Source. Her voice was calm, the eye of the storm. 18 hours at current speed, Captain. A system designated in old star charts as New Thesha. A silence, thick and heavy, settled over the bridge. The dream of every child who had ever looked up at a star. The fear of every historian who remembered the last war. Alert the fleet, Sarah ordered, her gaze never leaving the alien symphony on the screen. Send a priority burst to Earth. Message: we are not alone. The message would take weeks to crawl back along the relay network to the cradle of humanity. But its sending was the detonation of a silent bomb. The long, quiet childhood of humanity was over in the Federation colony of New Thesha, a world of crystalline spires and peaceful gardens. Ambassador Lyran felt the first tremor of the coming quake. The signal had arrived 6 hours ago. A crude, beautiful thing broadcast on ancient radio bands. Mathematical primes. The atomic structure of water. A simple pictogram of a being with 2 arms, 2 legs, and an open hand. A child's first words, spoken with a scholar's mind. It's genuine, she told her aide, Saren, her silver fur rippling with unease. The Altari were long-lived, and Lyran's 3 centuries had honed her instincts to a razor's edge. This felt pivotal. There's an urgency here, a desperation wrapped in profound intellect. The Council protocol requires months of analysis, Ambassador. The Council is not here, Lyran interrupted, her voice firm. I will take responsibility. Prepare a response. Basic mathematics. The periodic table. A map of our local stars. And open a channel. We answer. 8 hours later, the reply came. It was not just an answer. It was a leap. The unknown senders had deciphered the basics of galactic trade standard from that first exchange and were now using it, broken but unmistakable, to request formal docking permission. Their linguistic adaptation was terrifyingly fast. 2 days later, Lyran stood in the orbital station's viewing gallery, her heart a drum in her chest. The ships that emerged from the starry dark were not the graceful, organic vessels of the Federation. They were angular, brutal. They wore their scars like medals, hulls pitted and scored by encounters with things Lyran could not name. The lead ship, the Defiance, was a monolith of dark alloy, its lines speaking of sheer, uncompromising function. It moved with a predator's grace and a soldier's precision. "They're requesting to send a delegation," the comms officer said, voice hushed. "Granted," Lyran said, "but have security hidden. We show openness, but we are not fools." The meeting in the sterile conference chamber was a dance of unspoken assessments. The three humans who entered moved with a coordinated alertness that set Lyran's nerves on edge. Their eyes, so familiar, yet so alien, continuously mapped the room, noting vectors, cover, threat potential. The leader was Captain Sarah Chin. She offered a careful greeting in trade standard, her voice calm, but Lyran heard the steel beneath. They spoke of peaceful exploration, of lonely centuries. They shared surface data, 47 systems, 8 billion souls. But Lyran, a diplomat who had parsed the lies of 100 species, saw the gaps, the unspoken history. The reason their exploration vessel had enough weapon emplacements to glass a small moon at IT was when Lyran, seeking common ground, mentioned the local aggressors that the temperature in the room plunged. "We have detected considerable military activity," Sarah had said, her tone casual. "Organized fleets. Is there conflict?" "The hegemony?" Lyran explained. A mistake she would replay in her mind for years. A militant breakaway faction. They conquer, they enslave. The Federation has been unable to contain them. The change in the humans was instantaneous. It was not a shift in posture, but in quality. The friendly curiosity evaporated, replaced by a stillness so profound it was like watching a coiled spring. The warmth fled Sarah Chen's eyes, leaving behind something flat, cold, and infinitely dangerous. "Enslave," Sarah repeated the word, a drop of acid. "Yes, populations from conquered worlds are used for forced labor. They have taken 67 systems." Sarah Chun exchanged a glance with her companions. In that look, Lyran saw an entire silent conversation, a verdict being passed. "Thank you for the information, Ambassador," Sarah said, her voice now the gentle rasp of a blade being drawn. "We will need to consider this as we plan our integration." The meeting ended with polite promises. But as Lyran watched the humans retreat to their terrifying ship, a cold certainty settled in her gut. She had not introduced a new species to the galaxy. She had pulled the pin on a grenade and handed it to them. In her private log that night, she wrote, "The legends were understated. They are not merely dangerous. They are righteous, and the galaxy has just shown them a target for their wrath." Far from New Thesha, in the dark between stars, the Hegemony's third battle group, 3 planet-killing dreadnoughts under Commodore Vash, dropped into the New Geneva system. The order from Admiral Zakar had been simple: test the new quantum disruptors. Enslave or exterminate. Intelligence suggested a dozen primitive ships guarding 2 million souls. A morning's work. On the bridge of the Hegemony flagship, Vash opened a channel to the Human Defense Force. He saw a human female, Colonel Elena Martinez, on his screen. She looked unimpressed. "I am Commodore Vash. Your system is now Hegemony property. Surrender for processing, or be destroyed." The human's face remained impassive. "I see. And if we choose a third option?" "There is no third option." A ghost of a smile touched the human's lips. "There's always a third option, Commodore." The channel died. Annoyed, Vash ordered the attack. Reality disruptors, weapons that twisted spacetime itself, lanced out. They struck the lead human ship, the UES Determination. The ship shuddered and kept fighting. "Report!" Vash barked. "Direct hit, but minimal damage. Their hull integrity is holding." Before he could process this, the humans returned fire. Not energy beams, but kinetic slugs, rocks thrown at gods. They bounced harmlessly off the Hegemony's quantum shields. Vash sneered. Then the humans fired a second volley. These projectiles were different. They fractured in flight. The outer casing struck the shimmering quantum barrier and was deflected. But the inner core, a dense tungsten dart humming with a contrarian quantum frequency, slipped through the shield like a needle through silk. Shield penetration. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Panic, a foreign sensation, began to bleed onto the Hegemony bridge. The humans were not fighting a war of technology. They were fighting a war of ideas. While the Hegemony had spent decades perfecting an unbreakable shield, humanity, in its bloody, pragmatic history, had spent centuries learning that for every wall, there is a trickster, a Trojan horse, a hidden flaw. The battle dissolved into chaos. The human ships, hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned, moved with a synchronicity that mimicked a hive mind. They fought not as 12 ships, but as one organism with 12 claws. They learned, adapted, and struck where it hurt most. And as Vash struggled to regain control, worse news arrived. Commodore! Distress calls. We're under simultaneous attack. Human forces are hitting our bases. 12 different installations across 6 sectors. Vash's blood turned to ice. The 12 ships at New Geneva were not a defense force. They were the bait. While he had focused on the colony, humanity had silently mobilized and launched a coordinated, galactic-scale decapitation strike against his entire support network. The third battle group was not defeated. It was dismantled. When the shattered remnants of his flagship limped away hours later, Vash stared at the tactical logs, not with rage, but with a dawning cosmic dread. He had not been fighting soldiers. He had been fighting a phenomenon on New Geneva. Amidst the smoke and sirens, Colonel Martinez opened a channel to Earth. Her report was brief, a masterpiece of understatement that would echo through history. First contact with hostile alien force complete. Enemy capabilities exceed estimates but remain manageable. Recommend full military mobilization. The pack is under attack. Across 47 star systems, in shipyards and barracks and quiet homes, the message was received. The long peace was over. The wolves, it was time to remind the galaxy, were not extinct. They had merely been sleeping, and they had just been kicked awake. The galaxy, a sprawling tapestry of ancient empires and newborn stars, held its breath. The Hegemony's defeat at New Geneva was not a battle. It was a seismic event, a crack in the foundation of a millennium of political order. The shockwave raced through diplomatic channels and black market whispers alike. A new predator had entered the arena. Admiral Zakar received Commodore Vash's fractured, humiliating report in the sterile silence of his flagship strategium. He watched the tactical logs not once, but a dozen times, each replay etching a deeper line of cold fury and icy apprehension into his scaled features. His mighty dreadnoughts, testaments to Hegemony supremacy, had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and outfought by vessels that, by all rights, belonged in a museum. Kinetic penetrators. He hissed, pausing the recording on a frame showing a Hegemony shield flaring and failing. They defeated quantum harmonics with rocks. The insult was as profound as the tactical defeat. Intelligence Director Cross stood beside him, a data slate trembling slightly in his tentacles. It is not the technology, Admiral. It is the application. Their weapons are simple, but their understanding is diabolical. They are not overcoming our science. They are subverting its underlying assumptions. It is philosophical warfare. Zakar's fist slammed onto the console, a sharp crack in the quiet room. Do not lecture me on philosophy. I need projections, not poetry. What is their total strength? Where is their home world? Cross's faceted eyes dimmed. Our long-range spies in what remains of Federation space suggest their central systems lie in the Sol sector. The Sol system. As for strength, Admiral, the New Geneva force was a colonial militia. Our analysis of their command structure, their reserve mobilization patterns we intercepted. They suggest a total military population exceeding our initial estimates by an order of magnitude. How much? If their entire species is as militarized as their frontier colonies, Cross said, his voice barely a whisper, then we are not facing a fleet. We are facing a civilization in arms. Every transport might be a trooper. Every station, a fortress. They do not have an army. They are an army. A profound silence stretched between them, filled only by the low hum of the ship's drives. Zakar turned to stare at the starfield on the main viewer. The cozy, brutal calculus of his career, superior technology equals victory, was crumbling. He was facing an enemy whose primary weapon was not a gun, but a mindset. A species that saw a wall not as a barrier, but as a puzzle, and whose history was a long, bloody lesson in solving puzzles with ruthless efficiency. His pride warred with a nascent, chilling instinct. The instinct of prey. He crushed it. The hegemony did not know fear. It inspired it. Mobilize the first and second Grand Fleets, he commanded, his voice regaining its iron certitude. Every dreadnought, every cruiser, every escort. Converge on the Sol system. We will not nibble at their colonies. We will tear out their heart. Broadcast this order. All planetary assault weaponry is to be armed. If they will not kneel, we will scorch their cradle world to barren rock. It was the doctrine of ultimate terror, the final argument of tyrants. Break the will by threatening the womb. Cross looked as if he wanted to object, to cite the humans' terrifying, unpredictable response at New Geneva. But he saw the fanatical light in Zakar's eyes and remained silent. The die was cast on Earth. In the buried command nexus deep, below the Alps, Fleet Admiral Rebecca Hassan watched the hegemony's massive mobilization light up the strategic hologram like a plague of fiery locusts. The room, carved from bedrock and lined with crystalline data feeds, was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm gathering in the void. "They're coming for Sol," she stated, her voice calm, almost serene. "All of them. They've shifted from conquest to extermination." Around her, her staff, the best strategic minds of 3 generations, studied the flow of enemy icons. Projected strength, over 1,000 capital-grade vessels, including 12 Planet Breaker-class dreadnoughts. A young analyst reported, her voice tight. Time to Sol System frontier, 14 days at their best speed. Admiral Hassan steepled her fingers. And our mobilization? Omega Protocol is at 78% completion, replied General O'Reilly, his face etched with the fatigue of a man who had not slept in a week. The Martian and Jovian shipyards are producing at 300% nominal capacity. Every decommissioned hull from the last war is being retrofitted. But Admiral, the numbers still do not converge. Even with every hull we can crew, we will be outnumbered 3-1 at the point of contact. And their planet killers, Hassan nodded. She knew the numbers. They all did. This was the scenario the deepest, darkest contingency plans had gamed for centuries. The alien blitz, the ultimate siege. Humanity's entire history had been a preparation for this moment. Not for greeting friends from the stars, but for surviving the arrival of monsters. "We do not need to match them ship for ship," Hassan said, her gaze fixed on the holographic Earth, a fragile blue jewel. "We need to break their will. And to do that, we must show them something their philosophy cannot comprehend." She turned to the room. "Activate the Lazarus Array. Open the Black Vaults. Authorize the use of Class X strategic assets. This is no longer a border skirmish. This is the battle of the boneyard. We fight where our ancestors fell. We fight for every grave, every memory, every child not yet born. Transmit to all commands. The hour is upon us. Stand to." Throughout human space, the silent transformation became manifest. The disguise fell away. Asteroid mining stations shed their rocky shells, revealing pulsar core lances and missile batteries. Long-haul freighters on the Earth-Mars run docked and disgorged regiments of powered armor from hidden compartments. Civilian orbital habitats extended weapon booms and shield projectors. The myth of a peaceful, expansionist humanity evaporated, revealing the truth: a honeycomb of fortresses, a society engineered from the ground up for existential resilience. But the most profound change was not in the machines. It was in the people. On a terraformed plateau of Mars, an elderly historian named Dr. Eris Thorne, who had written definitive texts on the socio-political causes of the last war, closed his books and reported to a militia mustering point. He was handed a neural-linked targeting visor. "My hands shake," he told the young sergeant. "Your mind doesn't," the sergeant replied, clasping his shoulder. "We need people who understand why we fight, Doctor. Aim true." On a lush agricultural world in the Proxima Centauri system, a community that had lived in pastoral peace for 5 generations gathered in their town square. Their mayor, a woman with soil under her nails, spoke without amplification. "The hegemony takes slaves. They burn worlds. They are coming. The call has gone out. Who will hold the line here so others can strike?" Every hand, young and old, rose. They were farmers, botanists, teachers. By the next morning, they were learning to crew the defensive railguns buried in their hills. This was humanity's secret, the truth buried under the extinct species report. Their adaptability was not merely biological. It was social, moral, ideological. In the face of an external threat, their famed internal divisions dissolved into a terrifying unity. The pack instinct, honed on the African savanna and tempered in the nuclear fires of the last war, activated. Captain Sarah Chun witnessed this transformation firsthand as the Defiance raced back towards Seoul, a gathering storm of Allied ships forming around her. The Federation, shocked and galvanized by the human victory at New Geneva and horrified by Zakhar's genocidal intent, had voted, by a narrow, terrified margin, to intervene. A motley armada of Federation cruisers, fast and elegant but untested in real war, fell into formation beside the blocky human warships. Lyran was aboard the Federation flagship, Harmony's Shield. She linked with Sarah. The human captain's face on the screen was different. The diplomatic veneer was gone, sandblasted away by stellar winds and hard necessity. She looked carved from stone and resolve. "Ambassador," Sarah greeted, "your ships are welcome. Your rules of engagement may not survive first contact with the enemy. I need you to understand that." "What are your rules, Captain?" Lyran asked, her fur standing on end. Sarah's answer was simple, final. "Protect the innocent. Destroy the threat. There is no third rule." Meanwhile, in the Centauri archives, Archivist Kellen could no longer focus on dusty crystals. The galaxy was screaming. News of the coming cataclysm at Sol/Sol had reached even the deepest scholarly havens. She found herself drawn back to the ancient human file, reading it not as a curiosity, but as a prophecy. She cross-referenced it with new data streams, fragmentary sensor logs from New Geneva, intercepted human communications, brutally encrypted, but leaky with overwhelming traffic, diplomatic reports from Lyran. The timid language of the ancient explorers suddenly made terrible sense. They hadn't been frightened of human weapons. They'd been frightened of human potential. The report was a snapshot of a species in its adolescence, all rage and creativity. What would 3,000 years of survival, of nursing the wounds of self-inflicted apocalypse, have wrought? "They didn't die," she whispered to the silent, judging archives. "They went into the fire, and they forged themselves." She made a decision. She copied the entire human file along with every new datum she could find and broadcast it on an open scholarly frequency, tagged for the historical record. It was a tiny act of defiance against the coming darkness. Let the galaxy know, she thought, what is about to be unleashed. Admiral Zakhar's grand fleet was a spectacle of terrifying beauty. 1,000 ships, their hulls gleaming with the cold light of distant suns, moved as one organism, a vast metallic shark swimming through the interstellar deep. At its core were the planet breakers, city-sized vessels whose main weapons could unmake geology, triggering planetary core collapses. They were the ultimate expression of the Hegemony's creed. Submit or be unmade. As they crossed into the outer debris field of the Sol system, a region littered with ancient ship husks and memorial stations from the last war, a place humans called the Boneyard. Zakar felt his confidence return. This was the realm of the dead. Fitting. Long-range scan of the inner system, he ordered. The sensor officer worked, then frowned. Admiral, the system is filled with noise. Massive energy signatures, but they're chaotic, fluctuating. It's like a stellar storm, but artificial. I cannot get a clear count of defending vessels. Zakar scowled. Jamming. Primitive but effective. Maintain formation. All weapons to full charge. We will punch through their noise and deliver our message directly to their homeworld. He opened a fleet-wide channel, his voice echoing in 1,000 command decks. Warriors of the Hegemony. Ahead lies the lair of the primitive beasts who dare challenge our destiny. We will show them the price of defiance. Today, we erase a legend from the stars. A roar of approval feedback from 1,000 ships. The war machine pressed on, into the graveyard. Deep within the chaotic sensor fog, aboard the UES Defiance, Sarah Chun watched the Hegemony fleet enter the kill box. The noise was the Lazarus Array. 1,000 decoy transmitters, old reactor cores flaring to life on dead hulls. A symphony of electronic ghosts designed to confuse and disorient. They've taken the bait, Commander Jackson murmured. They think we're hiding in the noise. Good, Sarah said, her eyes on the tactical plot. All units, this is Defiance Actual. Execute Protocol Ragnarok. Phase 1. The welcome. On the edge of the Hegemony formation, space itself seemed to bleed. Hyperspace portals, ragged and violent unlike the Hegemony's smooth apertures, tore open. From them emerged not massive dreadnoughts, but swarms. Thousands of vessels, most no larger than a frigate, many clearly modified civilian frames, retrofitted mining barges, and old colony ships. They moved with a frantic, insectal energy, zipping around the Hegemony behemoths. Zakar laughed, a dry, harsh sound. They send gnats to sting a leviathan. Point defense, clear them. Brilliant lattices of laser fire and kinetic interceptors filled space. Human swarm ships died by the dozen, bursting into silent flowers of flame and debris. But for every one destroyed, 3 more darted in. They didn't fire at the dreadnought's armored hulls. They attached themselves, like remeras on a shark, like parasites on a beast. What are they doing? Zakar demanded, watching as hundreds of small craft latched onto his ships with magnetic grapples and cutting beams. The answer came in a series of localized, vicious explosions. Not ship killers, but surgical strikes. Sensor arrays blew out. Weapon emplacements were sheared off. Shield projector nodes were slagged. The swarm wasn't trying to destroy the fleet. It was trying to blind and cripple it. They are targeting our eyes and teeth, Cross yelled over the rising alarm klaxons. Their losses are catastrophic, but they are degrading our combat effectiveness by over 30%. Phase 1 was a sacrifice play, a brutal trade of lives for tactical advantage. And humanity, with the grim arithmetic born of the last war, paid the price without flinching. As the Hegemony point defense was overwhelmed and distracted, Phase 2 began. From behind the largest wrecks in the boneyard, the real human fleet emerged. Not the cobbled-together swarm, but the line of battle. The upgraded Defiance-class warships, the Martian-built Titan heavy cruisers, the swift, deadly Wolfpack frigates. Alongside them flew the Federation squadron, holding formation with disciplined, if anxious, precision. They did not form a wall. They formed a net. Small squadrons, each a combined arms package of human and Federation ships, positioned themselves at precise, calculated points around the Hegemony fleet, leveraging the chaos of the swarm attack. Admiral Hassan's voice came through the human command network, calm and clear. Phase 2. execute. It was not a single crushing blow. It was death by 1,000 cuts, executed with scalpel precision. A human squad would strike a Hegemony cruiser's engine nacelle, weakening it. A moment later, a Federation ship, with its more delicate but precise energy lances, would dart in and sever the nacelle completely. Another squad would lay down a suppressing barrage on a dreadnought's weapon batteries, allowing a third to swoop in and plant shape-charge breaching pods on its hull. They fought with a symbiotic efficiency that left the Hegemony reeling. The humans were the anvil, absorbing punishment, creating openings with brute force and unpredictable maneuvers. The Federation ships were the hammer, exploiting those openings with swift, clinical strikes. It was a dance of violence the Hegemony had never conceived of. Not a clash of empires, but a collaboration of defenders. Zakar, on the bridge of the Dominator, felt the battle slipping away. His mighty fleet was being systematically disabled, not destroyed. They were being dissected. Fury turned to desperation. "Enough!" he roared. "All planet breakers. Target the third planet. Ignore the parasites. Fire primary weapons. Burn their world." The order went out. The 12 city-killing dreadnoughts began the long, ominous power-up sequence for their core disruptors. Massive energy conduits glowed like angry suns along their spines on the Defiance. A priority alert flashed. "Captain, Hegemony planet killers are charging. They're targeting Earth. Time to firing solution. 90 seconds. Sarah Chen's heart turned to stone in her chest. She looked at the holographic image of Earth, so small, so blue, so achingly fragile against the cosmic dark. This was the moment. This was the abyss. She opened a channel not just to her fleet, but to every human and allied ship, on a frequency the Hegemony could also hear. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a world. "All units. This is Defiance Actual. Cancel prior targeting. New priority, the planet breakers. Execute Protocol Home Guard. Nothing gets through. Nothing." What followed was not tactics. It was transcendence. Human ships already engaged in life-or-death duels broke away, turning their naked backs to enemy fire. They threw themselves into the paths of the charging energy beams, sacrificing themselves in flashes of incandescent plasma to diffuse the blasts. Federation ships, their commanders crying out in a mix of terror and awe, followed suit, interposing their elegant hulls between the killing beams and the blue marble. But the beams were too powerful, too focused. Shields flared and evaporated. Hulls vaporized. A corridor of death was being cleared towards Earth. Then, from the dark side of the moon, a final dormant relic of the last war activated. A weapon not used in 300 years, its very existence a dark secret. The projectors were vast, built into lunar crater walls. They hummed to life, not with a weapon's snarl, but with the deep, mournful chord of a dying star. The golem array fire.it did not send a bolt of energy. It projected a field, a bubble of warped, recursive spacetime. The Hegemony's planet-killing beams struck this bubble and slowed. They didn't stop. They were consumed, their vast energy stretched, diluted, and harmlessly radiated away as Hawking radiation across a volume of space 1,000,000 miles wide. It was the ultimate shield, born of humanity's darkest hour, designed to defend against their own worst selves, now turned outward. The cost was apocalyptic. The lunar surface around the projectors fused to glass, then boiled away. The array, a one-shot weapon, burned out its ancient, irreplaceable core. But Earth was safe on the Dominator. Admiral Zakar stared, dumbfounded, at his screens. His ultimate weapon had been neutralized not by a bigger gun, but by a trick of physics his scientists had theorized was impossible. The myth was swallowing reality, and in that moment of stunned paralysis, Sarah Chan struck the head of the snake. "All remaining forces," she whispered into the calm on me. "Target the Hegemony command ship." The Defiance, flanked by the last of the Titan cruisers and a wedge of Federation vessels, ignored the rest of the battle and speared directly towards the Dominator. They flew through a storm of defensive fire, losing ships with every heartbeat, an arrow of vengeance aimed at the heart of the tyrant. They crashed through the final defensive screen, their hulls bleeding atmosphere and molten alloy. The Defiance's forward railguns, charged with the last of the ship's power, fired not at the bridge, but at the massive shield projector array on the Dominator's spine. The Federation ships, with their precise lances, targeted the power relays feeding it. The shields died. Sarah opened a final channel direct to Zakar. His face appeared, twisted in rage and dawning horror. "Admiral Zakar," she said, her voice hollow with exhaustion and the screams of the dying. "Your planet killers have failed. Your fleet is broken. Your creed is ash. Surrender. Now." He spat, a gesture of pure contempt. "You are still animals. You win nothing. The hegemony? The hegemony?" Sarah interrupted, her final words dropping like tombstones, "is a footnote. The story that matters now is ours." She nodded to her weapons officer. A single, low-yield tactical warhead, designed for surgical strikes, shot from the Defiance's belly. It flew through the breached shield, down a wounded engine vent, and detonated deep within the Dominator's primary reactor housing. The chain reaction was not a cataclysm. It was a quiet, internal death. Lights flickered and died across the 5-kilometer Leviathan. Its drives went dark. Its weapons fell silent. It was a dead thing, held together by momentum and memory. The battle of the Boneyard was over. Silence, heavier than any explosion, settled over the Sol system. The Hegemony fleet, leaderless, blinded, and surrounded, began to power down their weapons. Across the scorched and littered void, human and Federation ships, battered and bleeding, held their positions. They had won. They had saved Earth. But as Sarah Chun looked at the view screen, at the countless new graves glowing hot amidst the ancient wreckage, she knew the true cost. They had shown the galaxy their teeth. Now they would have to show it their soul. The legend was no longer a warning in a dusty archive. It was a fact, burning in the heavens, written in fire and blood and sacrifice. And its next chapter was about to begin. The silence after the storm was a living thing, thick with memory and ozone. The wreckage of the Hegemony's grand fleet drifted in the solar gravity well, a floating necropolis of shattered ambition. The human and Federation vessels that had survived hung among them like weary sentinels, their hulls venting steam and coolant into the vacuum, their crews moving in the stunned, methodical rhythms of those who have stared into the abyss and, by some miracle, forced it to blink first. On the bridge of the U.S. Defiance, Captain Sarah Chun sat in her command chair, her body held upright by sheer will. The neural interface crown felt like a vise of iron on her skull. The main viewer was a mosaic of destruction. The husk of the Dominator, the drifting, powerless planet breakers, the countless smaller ships reduced to glittering, frozen dust. The cost was imprinted behind her eyes, the flash of a friendly transponder winking out, the static-filled scream cut short over the comm, the sight of the Harmony shield taking a lance meant for her own ship. "Casualty reports are preliminary," Commander Jackson said, his voice stripped raw. "We lost over 60% of the swarm fleet, 30% of our main line of battle. The Federation squadron, they lost half. The lunar golem array is gone. Just gone." Sarah nodded, the motion sending a spike of pain through her neck. "Earth? Intact. Minor atmospheric heating from diffused energy. Some orbital infrastructure damage. The planet is safe, Captain. Safe." The word felt alien, inadequate. They had preserved the cradle, but at a price that would echo for generations. She opened a fleet-wide channel, her voice a dry rustle amplified across the void. "To all ships, human and allied, this is Defiance Actual. The immediate threat is neutralized. The Hegemony command structure has been decapitated. Hold your positions. Render aid to crippled vessels, friend or foe. Medical teams have priority. We are not animals. We prove it now. It was the first order of the peace, and it was more challenging than any wartime command. To offer succor to the architects of this slaughter went against every screaming instinct for revenge. But Sarah knew the battlefield that mattered now was the moral one. The galaxy was watching not just the hegemony remnants, but the countless neutral species, the Federation skeptics, history itself. Aboard the Federation flagship, now under the command of a junior officer after its captain's death, Ambassador Lyran watched the human transmissions. She saw their tugs, themselves damaged, venturing out to tractor hegemony life pods. She saw human medics in patched EVA suits crossing onto enemy hulls to treat wounded crew. The efficiency was gone, replaced by a weary, dogged compassion. It was, in its way, more terrifying than their battle fury. It spoke of a depth of character she was only beginning to fathom. She opened a channel to Sarah. The human captain's face was gaunt, her eyes like smoldering coals in ash. "Captain Chen," Lyran began, her diplomatic vocabulary failing her. "Your actions, the Federation Council is in emergency session. They are divided. Some see you as saviors. Others fear you have become the new hegemony." Sarah didn't even blink. "Let them fear. But watch what we do, Ambassador. The fear will change. It has to." Back on Earth, Fleet Admiral Rebecca Hassan addressed the Unified Earth Assembly. The chamber, carved into a mountain, was silent as a tomb. "We have won a battle," she stated, her voice echoing off the stone. "Not a war. The hegemony as a unified military force is broken. But its worlds remain. Its ideology festers in a billion hearts. We stand at a crossroads. We can become conquerors, seizing their territory, imposing our will, becoming the very monster we just fought. Or we can attempt something the galaxy has never seen. A victory without conquest. A peace built not on the broken backs of the defeated, but on the lifted hands of the liberated." She outlined the plan, born in the darkest watches of the night during the fleet's return. It was audacious. It was naive. It was quintessentially human. They would not occupy hegemony space. They would not install puppet governments. Instead, they would issue a simple galaxy-wide declaration. The war was over. All hegemony military assets were to stand down. Every enslaved population was to be immediately freed. Every world would be granted full, unfettered sovereignty. Human and Federation aid, food, medicine, engineers would be offered unconditionally to rebuild. And then, they would leave. The assembly erupted. Hawks screamed about wasted blood, about leaving a power vacuum, about the inevitability of a resurgent threat. Doves wept with relief and hope. The debate raged for days, broadcast to every human colony. It was the final, crucial battle of the war, the battle for humanity's soul and the Centauri archives. Archivist Kellen monitored it all. She had become an addict of the human signal. She watched their political debates, their memorial services, their raw public grief. She compared it to the cold, clinical fear in the ancient report. The file had been wrong. Humans were not defined by aggression. They were defined by choice. They contained the capacity for infinite darkness and boundless light, and their history was the story of the agonizing, glorious struggle to choose the light. The last war had been their ultimate failure. The Battle of the Boneyard and its aftermath were becoming their ultimate redemption. She published her findings, a massive addendum to the original file, titled, "A Postmortem on an Extinction That Never Happened, The Paradox of Human Moral Evolution." It concluded, "They are not the monster in the dark. They are the light we strike to keep that monster at bay. And in doing so, they remind us we can all be that light." Weeks turned into a tense, watchful month. Admiral Zakhar, recovered from his wounds and held in a Spartan but humane detention facility on Mars, was presented with the terms. He laughed, a broken, hollow sound. "You are fools," he told his human interrogator, a calm-eyed colonel who brought him water and asked about his homeworld's climate. You win the ultimate victory and throw it away. Strength is the only language the universe understands. Your mercy is a disease. It will kill you. The colonel merely nodded. Maybe, but we'd rather die of a disease called mercy than live forever with the cancer of tyranny. The choice, Admiral, is now yours. Your people's fate is in their hands, not ours. The declaration was broadcast on every frequency, in every known language, towards every hegemony-held star. It was signed by the unified Earth government and the Galactic Federation. It contained no threats, only promises, of freedom, of aid, of a seat at the table of galactic community for all who renounced conquest. The response was chaos, then revolution on 100 hegemony slave worlds. The broadcasts were intercepted, translated, and whispered in mines, shouted in factories, prayed in secret temples. The legend of the humans, the Deathworlders who had shattered the invincible fleet and then offered medicine, not chains, spread like stellar fire. Uprisings, long suppressed, ignited. Hegemony garrison commanders found themselves facing not just rebel slaves, but their own conscripted troops, turning their weapons on their former masters. Human ships, operating in small, vulnerable humanitarian groups, did not intervene in the fighting. They positioned themselves at the edges of conflict zones. When fleeing civilians or wounded warriors of any side stumbled into their perimeter, they were given shelter, medical care, and food. The message was unambiguous. We are not here to rule your war. We are here to save your people. Captain Sarah Chun and the patched-up Defiance found themselves above the hegemony industrial world of Carix 9, a planet whose atmosphere was a perpetual rust brown from orbital smelters. The local hegemony governor, a brutalist named Forlac, had barricaded himself in his orbital citadel, threatening to trigger the planet's core-tapping machinery and blow the world to fragments rather than surrender to primitive savages. Sarah's task force was a bizarre mix: the Defiance, 2 Federation medical frigates, and a converted human colony ship now serving as a floating hospital. They were outgunned 100 to 1 by the Citadel's defenses. Forlac hailed her, his bloated face filling the screen. "Human, I see your pitiful mercy fleet. Turn back. This world is hegemony property. These people are hegemony resources. If you attempt to land, I will scuttle the planet. Their blood will be on your hands." Sarah studied him. She saw not a fanatic, but a terrified accountant, a man whose entire worth was tied to a ledger of suffering, now facing its bankruptcy. She didn't threaten. She didn't plead. "Governor Forlac," she said, her tone that of a doctor delivering difficult news, "we have no interest in your property. We are here for the people of Carix 9. Your own people. We are receiving over 10,000 encrypted pleas for help per hour from the surface. Your soldiers, your administrators, your factory workers, they are asking us for sanctuary from you." Forlac sneered. "Lies. Propaganda." Sarah split her screen. On one side, Forlac's furious face. On the other, a live feed from the planet's surface, smuggled out by a slave technician. It showed crowded subterranean barracks, sickly children, the hollow eyes of millions living in a mechanized hell. And it showed something else. Crude posters, scrawled on rusted walls, depicting the blocky silhouette of a human warship, not as a monster, but as a beacon. "Your authority is an illusion, Governor," Sarah said quietly. "It exists only as long as people choose to be afraid. They have chosen hope. Stand down. Let our medical teams land. No one needs to die today." She then did something utterly unpredictable. She gave an order that bypassed her tactical officer. "Helm, bring us to within 10 kilometers of the Citadel's main weapon battery. Hold position. Power down all defensive systems. Ambassador Lyron, please have your medical frigates follow our lead." On the bridge, Jackson stared at her. "Captain, that's suicide. He'll vaporize us." "I'm counting on him seeing the choice," Sarah said, her eyes never leaving Forlac's feed. "We are showing him our throat. He can take his revenge, kill us, and be remembered forever as the butcher who murdered unarmed healers. Or he can step aside and be remembered as the man who ended the nightmare. It was the ultimate gamble, a move of pure, terrifying moral jujitsu. The Defiance and its escorts drifted forward, defenseless, like a lamb before a wolf. On the citadel, Vorluk stared at the tactical display, his finger hovering over the weapon firing control. The human ship was a sitting duck. One shot, one glorious, defiant shot for the Hegemony. But his officers were not meeting his eyes. The live feed from the surface was playing on monitors all over the citadel. He could hear the whispers in the corridors that he saw not a warship, but a mirror. In its silent, vulnerable approach, he saw the hollow core of his own philosophy, that strength was only proved by destruction. And he saw its opposite, a strength proved by incredible, stupid, beautiful vulnerability. His finger trembled. He did not fire. The weapons of the Carrick's 9 citadel powered down. The hangar bays opened. Governor Forlack, a broken man, surrendered not to an army, but to an idea. The images that flooded the galactic networks that day were not of conquest, but of liberation. Human and Federation medics in bright hazard suits moving through the soot-choked streets of Carrick's 9, not with rifles, but with medkits and water purifiers. Former slaves, weeping as they touched grass grown in a human aeroponics bay. A Hegemony soldier, his uniform torn, cradling his feverish child in a human field hospital. This was the true victory. It was viral. It was irreversible. One by one, Hegemony worlds declared their independence. The empire collapsed not with a bang, but with a sigh of profound relief. Human and Federation task forces transitioned from peacekeepers to reconstruction coordinators. They helped build governments, repair ecosystems, establish trade links that bypassed old hierarchies. A year after the Battle of the Boneyard, a grand conclave was convened on Centauri Prime. Not a victory parade, but a constitutional convention. Every species, every former Hegemony world, every Federation member was invited. The humans did not demand a seat at the head of the table. They requested a seat among equals. Ambassador Lyron, now speaking for a newly confident and unified Federation, presided. Admiral Zakhar, released as part of a general amnesty for military personnel who committed no personal war crimes, attended as a private citizen of his homeworld. He sat in the observer's gallery, a silent, brooding monument to a fallen god. The debates were fierce. Borders, trade laws, mutual defense pacts, the very definition of sentient rights. The humans argued passionately, but they also listened, a novelty in galactic politics. They shared their darkest history openly. The last war, the Golem array, the deep-seated cultural trauma that made them both warriors and healers. They offered their technology not as a gift, but as an open-source library with one condition. It must never be used for conquest. As the conclave entered its final week, a delegate from a newly freed aquatic species, whose world had been strip-mined by the Hegemony, addressed the assembly. Her voice, translated, was a soft, bubbling melody. "We have a saying in the deep currents," she said. "The predator who shows you its teeth teaches you fear. The predator who shows you its belly teaches you trust. Humanity has shown us both. They have the teeth to shatter fleets, but they chose to show us their belly, their vulnerability, their trust. They have taught us that true strength is not in never being vulnerable, but in choosing when to be. We vote for the new charter. We vote for a galaxy built on that lesson." The charter passed. It established the Galactic Concord, a mutual defense and prosperity alliance with a central tenet inspired by the human example. The right of self-defense is sacred, but the duty to protect the innocent is paramount. The Concord's founding documents preamble was drafted by a committee, but its most famous line came from a recorded speech by Fleet Admiral Hassan. "We are not defined by the wars we win, but by the peace we are brave enough to build." In the archives, Kellen placed the final entry in the human file. It was a simple image, the symbol of the new galactic concord. a circle of many different stars, with a single, unadorned blue sphere at its center, not above, but integrated. The annotation read, Homo sapiens, the wise man, a misnomer for millennia, perhaps now finally earned. On a green hill on Earth, overlooking the rebuilt Geneva, a new monument was dedicated. It was not a statue of a warrior or a statesman. It was an abstract piece. Two twisted, scarred pillars of metal from the boneyard, leaning against each other, holding up a third, smooth pillar that reached for the sky. At its base, the inscription, For the fallen da for the freed, we remember the price that we choose the future. Captain Sarah Chun, now an admiral leading the Concorde's exploration and rapid response branch, stood before it. Lyran was at her side, along with representatives from a dozen species. The sky was a clear, impossible blue. Does it feel strange? Lyran asked softly. To be a living legend? Sarah smiled, a genuine, weary expression that finally reached her eyes. The legend was a warning about monsters, Ambassador. We're just people. Flawed, scared, stubborn people who got very, very lucky and learned a very hard lesson a long time ago. She looked up at the monument. The real legend isn't us. It's the choice. The choice to put down the gun and pick up the medkit. The choice to build instead of break. That's the story that needs to be told. As the ceremony ended, Sarah's comlink chirped. A calm voice from Concorde Operations reported a distress signal from a previously unmapped system on the galactic rim, a stellar flare threatening a pre-industrial civilization. She shared a look with Lyran, then with the representatives around her, an insectoid Zenth, a gaseous being from Sigma Draconis, a marsupial-like engineer from New Thesha. Well, she said, a familiar calm settling over her features. Duty calls. They walked away from the monument together, a unified command council for a new age. The galaxy was no longer a dark forest full of monsters. It was a garden, still wild, still dangerous, but now tended by hands that had known the thorns and had chosen to plant flowers instead. The ancient report in the Centauri archives was wrong. Humanity was not extinct. It was not a threat. It had become something far more powerful, far more dangerous to the forces of darkness. A promise. A promise that echoes forever in the silent spaces between the stars. A whisper and a roar from the species that stared into the void and, instead of finding monsters, decided to build a home.